Let's dive into one of Batman's villains from the DC universe and build Clayface as a playable character in Dungeons & Dragons. There's actually a lot of great options for Clayface, but we gotta start with the species. There's two specifically perfect options for him, considering he has the ability to morph his body, making him look like pretty much anybody, but also just generally changing his shape. Basically, the two best choices are either Plasmoid from the Spelljammer book, or going with a Changeling. Now, Changelings can change their appearance and make themselves look like other people. However, there is a ton of ways to pull that off in D&D. So since we're a little more limited on the more gooey nature of Clayface, we're going to go with Plasmoid. This gives us the feature Amorphous, so you can actually squeeze through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide. You get natural resilience to acid and poison damage, granting resistance to acid and poison damage while also giving you advantage on saving throws against being poisoned. And you get the feature Shape Self. So as an action, you can reshape your body to give yourself a head, 1 or 2 arms, 1 or 2 legs, and makeshift hands and feet. But you can just as easily revert to a limbless blob if you want to. And as a bonus action, you can extrude a pseudopod that is up to 6 inches wide and 10 feet long, or reabsorb it into your body. As part of the same bonus action, you can use the pseudopod to manipulate an object, open or close a door or container, or pick up or set down a tiny object. It does have some limitations because it doesn't have any actual sensory abilities, it can't attack, it can't activate magic items, and it can't lift more than 10 pounds. But there's still plenty of options to absolutely break your games with this. Then when it comes to a background, I was super tempted to go with Entertainer, because before Clayface became Clayface, he was a normal human that was an actor. He got into an accident, it scarred his face up pretty bad, and he started using a cream that turned out to have some crazy chemicals that turned him into Clayface. So I was super tempted to lean into that actor background and go with an entertainer. However, in the backgrounds, entertainer is much more about being a musician and less about acting, and I don't really want a bunch of musical skills. So instead, we're going to go with charlatan. This is much more about throwing on a face and acting, because it gives us skill proficiencies in deception and sleight of hand, as well as tool proficiencies in a forgery kit. And in the 2024 version of D&D, it also gives us the skilled feat. So we get proficiency in 3 skills or tool. And the very first proficiency we're going to grab with this is proficiency with the disguise kit. We need to be able to disguise ourselves as early as possible. Then we'll also grab athletics and performance. Then when it comes to some starting stats, we're going to have a point spread that looks like this, needing some definite physical attributes, but we need to not forget about our charisma. And speaking of that charisma, we need a starting class. And considering you had to give up a certain aspect of yourself becoming Clayface because you wanted a level of beauty that you didn't necessarily have anymore, that feels like making a deal you probably should have avoided. Which makes me want to go with a Warlock. Becoming a Warlock, you get some spell casting. So as far as a cantrip, we need to make sure we have ways to help out our charisma and disguising ourselves. So in order to help that out a little bit more, we're going to grab the cantrip Friends, which allows you to charm humanoids, which can be super helpful. And speaking of that, when we get some first level spells, we're going to grab Charm Person. And then as far as some more physical help, we'll grab Armor of Agathis, which gives us 5 temp HP, and if a creature hits you with a melee attack before this spell ends, that creature takes 5 cold damage. And we'll also grab Arms of Hadar. So a bunch of tendrils erupt out from you, just like your goo manages to reach out, and it forces everybody within 10 feet of you to make a strength save, and on a failed save, they take 2d6 necrotic damage. And they can't take reactions until the start of the next turn. Then when it comes to our Warlock stuff, we get an Eldritch Invocation right away. And you're able to shape your body into various weapons, so I'm going to grab Pact of the Blade. Think of this as turning your body into some various weapon, and you can use your charisma modifier for the attack and damage rolls, but you don't have to. It's just an option. And since we didn't put a ton into our charisma, we're not going to be using charisma for those attacks. We'll stick with mostly our strength. Then at second level of Warlock, we get to choose 2 more Eldritch Invocations. So to make sure you're especially hardy, we'll grab the Eldritch Invocation lessons of the first ones. This allows us to grab an Origin feat. So we're going to grab the feat, Tough, giving us an extra 2 hit points of health per level of this overall build. And then the other Eldritch Invocation I'm going to grab is Mask of Many Faces. This allows you to cast Disguise Self without expending a spell slot. And I've been in a campaign where somebody is using this very skillfully, and it can absolutely break your games if it's used properly. And we needed a way to disguise yourself very easily. So being able to use it constantly without worrying about any spell components or spell slots is especially powerful, especially for Clayface. Then the other feature you get at second level of Warlock is Magical Cunning. So you can regain half of your Warlock spell slots over the course of 1 minute, but you can only use this feature once per long rest. Then it's time to embrace the big hulking nature of being Clayface, and we're going to multi-class into Barbarian. Now, if you wanted to optimize this a bit, take 1 level of Barbarian first because they get way more health than any other starting class. Then take your 2 levels in Warlock, then jump back over to Barbarian. But we're going to go ahead and stick with the overall feel of this character and go through more what they would experience as they leveled up and became more and more of what Clayface is. Now that you've become a Barbarian, you get access to Rage. So as a bonus action, you can activate your Rage, giving you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. You get bonus damage whenever you're doing any sort of melee attack that relies on your strength, and that Rage damage bonus increases as you level up in Barbarian. Also, when you're enraged, you have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. The only big downside with Rage is you can't maintain concentration on spells, and you can't cast spells while you're raging, which is why when we chose most of our Warlock stuff, we didn't focus too hard on concentration spells. Also, at first level of being a Barbarian, you get unarmored defense. So your armor class equals 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your constitution modifier. You can still use a shield and gain this benefit, so I would highly recommend that because otherwise your armor class is going to suffer a bit throughout this build. At second level of Barbarian, you get Danger Sense, so you have advantage on all dexterity saving throws. Also at second level of Barbarian, you get Reckless Attack. So on the first attack of your turn, you can give yourself advantage on all of your attacks for the turn, but any attacks against you will then also have advantage. Then at third level of Barbarian, you get Primal Knowledge. So you can get proficiency in 1 skill. We'll just grab Perception because it's generally pretty useful, but we also get a Barbarian subclass at third level. And there was 2 options here that felt pretty fitting for Clayface. I was very tempted to go with Path of the Giant because Clayface manages to get pretty darn big. But I wanted to be able to use our physical body as more weapons that we can shapeshift into whatever we need for the moment. And there's a great subclass for this, and it comes from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and it's called Path of the Beast, and it gives us the feature Form of the Beast. So when you rage, you can transform part of yourself, shifting your clay-like nature into whatever you need. So while you can always summon a weapon with your Pact of the Blade, you can also have a bite attack, doing 1d8 piercing damage on a hit, and once on each of your turns when you hit a creature with this bite, you can regain a number of hit points equal to your proficiency bonus, but only if you have less than half of your total hit points. Or you can transform your hands into claws, which I would probably play off as that giant spiked ball you tend to use so often in the Batman cartoons, and these claws will allow you to do 1d6 slashing damage on a hit, and once on each of your turns when you attack with a claw using the attack action, you can make 1 additional claw attack as part of the same action, which is pretty helpful because since you took 2 levels in Warlock to start, most other non-multi-classing builds are going to get extra attack at this level. So now you still have access to an extra attack even though you're only 3rd level of Barbarian. The last option is to grow a tail. It's a lashing, spiny tail that deals 1d8 piercing damage on a hit, but if a creature you can see within 10 feet of you hits you with an attack roll, you can also use your reaction to swipe your tail and roll a d8, applying the bonus to your armor class, which can be very helpful because, like I said, your armor class is going to be a little limited throughout this build. Then at 4th level of Barbarian, you get an ability score improvement. And while optimization does make me want to boost up our strength, I need to go into what's true to character. So we're going to take the feat Actor. This boosts our charisma score by 1 point, rounding it out, and we get the feature Impersonation. So while you're disguised as a real or fictional person, you have advantage on deception and performance checks to convince people that you are that person, and you get the feature Mimicry. So you can mimic the sounds of other creatures, including speech. Then at 5th level of Barbarian, you get extra attack. So now you can attack twice as part of your normal action, and if you have claws active, you get 1 more attack on top of that. 5th level of Barbarian gives us fast movement, so your movement speed is boosted by 10 feet. 6th level of being a Beast Barbarian gives us Bestial Soul. So every short or long rest, you can swap out what this does, because it can either boost up your jumping ability, give you a climbing speed, or give you a swimming speed. 7th level of being a Barbarian gives us Feral Instinct, so you get advantage on your initiative checks, and you get the feature Instinctive Pounce, so as part of your bonus action when you enter a rage, you can move up to half your movement speed. 8th level of Barbarian gives us an ability score improvement, so let's go ahead and round out our strength and constitution scores. 9th level of being a Barbarian gives us Brutal Strike. So if you use your Reckless Attack ability, you can actually give up advantage on one of your strength-based attacks, as long as you don't have disadvantage in the process. If that attack still hits, it deals an extra 1d10 damage, and you can cause a Brutal Strike effect. Either Forceful Blow, pushing a creature 15 feet away from you, and then you can move up to half your speed without provoking any opportunity attacks, or you can do Hamstring Blow, reducing a target's speed by 15 feet. At 10th level of being a Beast Barbarian, you get Infectious Fury. So when you hit a creature with one of your natural weapons while you're raging, your clay-like nature can actually kind of curse a target. The target has to succeed a Wisdom saving throw, with the challenge of that Wisdom save being against your Constitution modifier plus 8 plus your proficiency bonus, but if they fail, they suffer one effect of your choice. Either the target must use its reaction to make a melee attack against another creature of your choice, as if you're wrapping your clay-like appendages around the creature and forcing them to hit somebody, or you can force them to take 2d6 psychic damage, but you can only use either of these a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, regaining all uses on a long rest. Then at 11th level of Barbarian, you get Relentless Rage. So if you drop to 0 hit points while your rage is active and don't die outright, you can make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. If you succeed, your hit points instead goes to a number equal to twice your Barbarian level. Each time you use this feature, the DC increases by 5, but it resets back down to 10 whenever you finish a short or long rest. At 12th level of Barbarian, you get another ability score improvement, so let's go ahead and boost up your strength by 2 points. And then at 13th level of Barbarian, you get Improved Brutal Strike. So you have a couple new options for your Brutal Strike ability. You can either do Staggering Blow, forcing a target to have disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes, and it can't make opportunity attacks until the start of your next turn, or you can do Sundering Blow. So the next attack roll made by another creature against the same target gains a +5 bonus to the attack roll. At 14th level of being a Beast Barbarian, you get Call of the Hunt. So when you enter a rage, you can choose a number of creatures equal to your Constitution modifier within 30 feet of you, and you gain 5 temporary hit points for each creature that accepts the feature. Until the rage ends, the chosen creatures can actually add a d6 to any damage they deal as long as the damage dealt is related to some sort of attack roll. 15th level of Barbarian gives us Persistent Rage, so it's a little easier to maintain your rage, and when you roll initiative you can actually regain all expended uses of your rage once per long rest. Then at 16th level of Barbarian, let's go ahead and boost up your strength score by 2 more points because we'll get an ability score improvement at this level, and then I was very tempted to jump back over to Warlock because I really wanted another ability score improvement, and we only have 2 levels left before hitting max level, but then we would be forced to choose a Warlock subclass. And the only one I think could have fit was a Fathomless Warlock because they have tentacles and stuff that they can reach out and deal some damage with, and it felt like you whipping the clay-like appendages at people, but that would require a melee spell attack, and our charisma modifier isn't that great. And even on top of that, I couldn't really think of too many epic boons that would be super helpful for Clayface, or at least fitting for the character. So instead of jumping back and forth on our classes, I'm going to go ahead and keep powering through with Barbarian. So at 17th level of Barbarian, you get Improved Brutal Strike. So the extra damage of your Brutal Strike increases to 2d10, and you can use 2 different Brutal Strike effects at the same time. And then at 18th level of Barbarian, you get Indomitable Might. So anytime you make a strength check or a strength saving throw and you roll less than your strength score, you can then replace whatever you rolled with your strength score instead. It tends to be a bit weird to mix Warlock and Barbarian, but it seemed fitting for Clayface. If you want access to the character sheet for this build or any of my other builds, feel free to check out my Patreon, linked in the description and the comments down below. But otherwise, if you want to be great at disguising yourself while being a giant hulking monstrosity of ooze that can turn yourself into a living weapon and want to play as Clayface in Dungeons & Dragons, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here helping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session.